Good evening. My name is Janae Hunter, and today my team and I will be presenting and bringing awareness to the topic of gun control, specifically in America. Now, as you all may know, be familiar with, or have seen in the news, the topic at hand has become very prevalent in society over the past few years due to the increasing rate of fatality by gun. And there's also been this big debate on if the government needs to get a firmer grip due to this increasing rate or if they even have the power to based on the Second Amendment rights. But what we do know is in America alone, every year on average, there's around 36,000 fatalities and a lot more, over 76,000 injuries due to some form of gun violence. And these forms include, but are not limited to, murder, suicide, legal interventions, and some form of domestic violence. So, who actually has these guns in America? Well, the overall population is around 327 million American citizens, but according to Christopher Ingram with the Washington Post, there are more than 393 million civilian owned firearms in the United States alone. This is enough for every man, woman, and child to own a gun, and there still be 67 million guns left over. Aside from the civilian-owned firearms, law enforcement also has around 1 million firearms, which equates to around a 1 to 6 ratio, 6 guns to every one officer, and then the military has around 4.5 million firearms. Okay, so who can actually have these guns legally in America? Well, federal and state laws have been put into place to detail who is fit to own a gun, and federal law is basically just saying who is eligible to purchase or have a permit, and then state is just adding further restrictions to certain categories of certain people. All right. And there have been certain acts put into place over the years to contain these weapons a little bit more, and some of those acts include the National Firearms Act, the Gun Control Act, which is the big one, the Gun Free School Zone Act, and then the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, which put in place background checks in order to purchase a gun. Okay. And to make this simpler, I'm going to say who cannot purchase guns in America under federal law. So under federal law, you cannot purchase a gun if you have been convicted of or under indictment for a crime punishable by imprisonment for a year or more. You're a fugitive of injustice. You are an unlawful user or addict to a controlled substance if you are underage. And the underage law includes handguns, licensed handguns, 21, licensed long guns, you have to be 18, but for unlicensed handguns, you have to be 18, and then unlicensed long guns, it's crazy. You don't have to have any age. There's no age minimum for possession or to have ammunition. But others under federal law include if you have been discharged from the military, if you have renounced your citizenship, or if you have been convicted of a misdemeanor offense of domestic violence. All right, and under state law, there is a few more categories that go more in depth to if you can purchase a gun in their state, and some of these include violence or gun-related misdemeanors, dangerously mentally ill, drug and alcohol abusers, and then juvenile offenders. And here's just a list of the states, and if you're able to purchase a gun based on these categories within the states. And if you look at Tennessee, you are not able to purchase a gun if you have a gun misdemeanor, if you are dangerously mentally ill, if you are a drug or alcohol abuser, but you can if you are a juvenile offender. Now, if you look at Arkansas, it's complete opposite. You can purchase a gun if you have a gun misdemeanor, if you are a drug abuser, if you do abuse alcohol, but you cannot if you are dangerously mentally ill. So next, my teammate is just going to go over what guns look like in America.
Gun control in the United States seems to be a perpetual problem amongst many citizens, and basically, when people think of gun control, they refer to it as a legal matter to where its purpose is to restrict the possession or even the use of any firearm. But 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 throughout other more developed countries, it seems to be the gun control seems to be more strict and as less controversial or uncontroversial to a point where there's more discipline with this matter. Gun control in the United States seemingly is the most controversial conflict within this country due to the fact that it has the highest homicide rate by the use of a firearm compared to the more developed countries. And when I say developed, I'm talking about the high income countries such as the United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, and so on, Germany. And but the controversy is surrounded by the fact that some people may argue that firearms should be as as less accessible because it will obviously save lives and reduce crime, opposed to the citizens that will say, hey, look, we can use these firearms to defend ourselves against other criminals that may be armed. And so there's a lot of debate surrounding this topic in the US. And of course, there's a lot of factors that influence a lot of these mass shooters to go wild with this. And a lot of American lawmakers have come to a consensus that video games or mental illnesses play a big role in these shootings today, as a lot of Americans are depicted as having a large obsession for guns, and this is a policy that's been looked at for years now, to where they need to limit the lethal weapons that are accessible to a lot of citizens in the United States. To a lot of In 2019 alone, there's been over 250 mass shootings in the U.S. and at least over 45%, or roughly around 45 or 46% of civilians in the U.S. own fire guns, and this, of course, results to the rate of gun deaths increasing, which is a remarkable number, and this is all according to the data collected by Gun Violence Archive. Moving on to gun control in other countries, for instance, in the UK, it is a lot more stricter to the point where there's no self-defense and citizens just being able to purchase these weapons nearby. And so if one is to own a firearm in the UK, they're usually seen as a criminal who has possessed this object illegally. So therefore, their homicide rates aren't as high as, or even close to, the U.S.'s rates. And this can also be said for Japan, who have a zero tolerance rate for gun ownership in the country, and which is completely and definitely stricter. But in countries such as Australia and Germany, you can have a license to own a gun for leisure or hobby aspects, but people are usually trained not to use on other individuals, and so there's a lot of strictness throughout that. And this is where the U.S. could definitely learn.
Hey guys, my name is Jack Edwards, and our group researched the effects of gun control, and we compared the U.S. to other countries. For my subtopic, I'll be talking about mental health and gun control, and the effects of mental health on being able to purchase a gun. So, the effect of mental health on being able to buy a gun. I believe that people should be background checked before being allowed to buy a gun. Most mass shootings and male suicides are caused by people that have mental illnesses, so I believe a buyer should have to show medical records before being allowed to purchase a gun. So, what is a mental illness? According to Metzel, mental illness is defined as the inability to cope with one's ordinary demands of life. There is no cure for mental illnesses, there are only treatments to lessen the effects of the disease. Although there are two types of recovery, the first is stabilizing symptoms and restoring social function, and the second is changing one's attitudes and feelings and developing a new meaning in one's life. Statistics for mental health mass shootings. Nearly 20% of Americans are coping with mental illnesses, and 4% have severe mental illnesses. And 5% of these people engage in violent crimes or acts. Current policies suggest that mental illnesses promote violence, especially when gun accessibility is increased. Reports suggest that 60% of people that cause mass shootings in the U.S. since 1970 displayed symptoms of mental illnesses. And people with schizophrenia have a 65 to 130% greater chance of committing a crime over the general public. So, background checks to acquire a gun. Unlicensed sellers, and those are people who sell guns online, at gun shows or other places without a federal dealer's license, they can transfer firearms without having to run a background check. 22% of U.S. gun owners acquired their latest firearm without a background check, and 80% of all firearms acquired for criminal purposes are obtained through transfers from unlicensed sellers. Background checks. All federally licensed locations must background check. The Gun Control Act of 1968, this prohibits a person to be sold a firearm if he or she is deemed a danger to himself, herself, or others, or lacks the mental capacity to contract or manage his or her own affairs. The National Instant Criminal Background Check System, or the NICS, resolves background checks in less than 2 minutes or less. Federal law does not require states to submit information to the NICS, yet state law states that they should report to NICS when a person is deemed mentally ill. So this is a chart of the total number of state mental health records made available to the NICS from 2004 to 2011. So, in conclusion, a person should have to show medical records and be background checked before being allowed to purchase a gun, in my opinion. Mentally ill people have a greater chance to commit violent crimes. And gun control, it's a big problem in the U.S., so more background checks would overall help the problem. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Parker Lackland, and my portion of our group presentation will be the gun control legislation process and how we could possibly go about enforcing gun control legislation. So, as we all know, the gun control issue in the United States has been a very prevalent issue for many, many years. And what I hope to do with this presentation is not to sway anybody's opinion on the matter, but instead to attempt to provide information to the listener so that then they are then able to form their own opinions on the matter. This graph here is just a graph that shows how there's really no extreme correlation to the strictness between gun control laws and violent crime in the United States for the past couple of decades. So as we all know, the Second Amendment in our Constitution grants every American the basic right to bear arms. However, there are very different interpretations regarding the relevance of this amendment, as it was created very long ago when our country was founded, and many people still question the importance of protecting yourself with a gun in this day and age. And this difference in opinion has thus created two opposing arguments, one that is in favor of keeping guns and keeping our Second Amendment to have our basic right to bear arms, and the other that is in favor of getting rid of guns completely. So some of the firearm destruction logistics that I would like to lay out, one of my questions being, is it possible to get rid of guns completely in the United States? And what would the destruction process of these guns look like? As I do believe that it is possible to destroy the guns that have serial numbers and can be tracked by our government, I also believe that it's logistically impossible to destroy every single gun that is in existence and that is out on the market in our country. Thus leading me to my next question, would the black market trade for firearms be affected? And my answer would be absolutely not. We've seen it before. There is a huge black market industry for guns in our country, and these guns are obtained illegally and have no serial number. There would be no way for our government to track them, and it would make it logistically impossible to destroy these guns that are already in the black market. Now, some of the ideas for enforcement of gun control laws, starting with, is it possible to enforce a complete ban on all guns? Now, we've seen this happen before in our black market for drugs, as they are actually very similar issues. For example, we have banned marijuana before in the past, and it has proven to be largely unsuccessful, as marijuana has still been very prevalent in our black market in the United States, as well as our economy, and the drugs are still out there and people are still using them, whether they're legal or illegal, and it's just impossible to enforce a complete ban on that sort of substance. Well, one of our options in the past for enforcement of our gun control laws has been to impose stricter background checks, whether these background checks regard mental illness or criminal history. And these differing opinions on what constitutes a mental illness and who can and cannot have a gun has rendered background checks largely ineffective in the past, and I don't see that changing any time in the near future. Now, just to highlight some of the legislation process, there is a driving question about who legislates the issue of guns, whether it be our state or federal government. However, I believe that the difficulty that comes with our federal and state governments coming to an agreement just makes the legislation process that much harder and makes it that much less possible to come to a consensus on how to deal with the gun control issue in the United States. There is a specific court case. It is a good example of a time where a state has tried to enforce a complete ban on handheld firearms, and that would be the District of Columbia or Washington, D.C. And this decision was actually ruled unconstitutional by our Supreme Court. And that just shows how difficult it is to not have conflicting interests between parties in our government. So, in conclusion, I believe that it is nearly impossible to successfully regulate and enforce gun control on a national level, especially in the United States, mainly due to the fact that there are too many variables regarding the logistics and the difference in opinion between opposing sides on the matter. However, maybe the only possible way to successfully legislate the issue, in my mind, without finding conflicting interests between our branches of government in the United States, would be to completely amend the Constitution.
In my opinion, there's a thin line between self-defense and the deadly force of guns. I believe that gun control should be enforced and protected more than it is today. People owning guns is a basic American right that we all have, but I believe that the government should have more laws about who can buy and have access to guns. Without restrictions on who can own a gun, depending on the state that you live in, as long as you're 18 or 21 in some states, you can get your license to carry. This makes it easy for criminals, the mentally ill, and even young children have some type of access to get their hands on a gun. If we were to have a government that would enforce laws, we could possibly have a decline in the amount of deaths each year by guns. A big reason that people feel like they need guns is for protection. Having a gun handy makes us feel safer and have a defense weapon if we were ever to need one. However, if we were to have better gun control, we would feel safe knowing that it wasn't just so easy for anyone to get their hands on such a dangerous weapon. 5 states, including California, Florida, Illinois, New York, and South Carolina, prohibit people from carrying handguns in public. However, 31 states allow the open carrying of handguns without any license or permit. In some cases, guns must be unloaded, but still, this makes it possible for anyone to get their hands on a gun, which can lead to more shootings, mass shootings, and deaths. People disagree about gun control laws. A main reason that people have is that they need to carry a gun in order to feel safe, which many people can understand in today's day and time. However, we have others in this world who do not have good intentions if they were to have a gun. Many deaths and mass shootings could have been avoided if guns were not so easy to come by. Although we do not always know someone's intentions with guns, some people have tragic events that happen in them that can cause them to act out in a way that they would normally not do. It could have been prevented if the United States had gun control laws. Without gun control, it is way too easy for anyone to get their hands on such a dangerous weapon. In 2018, around 40,000 people's lives were taken from a gun. I believe that if we regulate guns, some of these deaths could have been avoided.